Ladies and gentlemen, Ian R. Craig.
Thanks, mate. Sorry, I don't normally walk up the centre aisle from the back. It's just that I remembered I forgot to put my teeth in. This age shit doesn't come alone, does it? It brings all sorts of trauma. I'm getting used to this new dental architecture, so you have to forgive me if I hit a list or whatever occasionally. Well, thanks for coming out tonight. It's a wonderful turnout, and it's almost my second home. I think this is something like the fifth or sixth time I've spoken at New Horizons, and I always get a wonderful welcome. And thanks very much to James and Jen, because they're wonderful hosts, and of course they're doing exactly what Mike was talking about, which is helping to spread the word in their way by arranging this type of event. And we'll talk a little bit more about that through the evening. Before I get underway, a blatant plug for the forthcoming Alternative View 4. There's the clues in the name. The fourth event of this nature. And they've been increasing in size. When we started, we did the first one in Totnes just 2 years ago. We had about 170 people at the first event. And then we moved it to London. We moved it to the Thistle Hotel in Heathrow, where we had close on 400 people. And then in Bristol last November. And with the elections coming up, not that they mean very much, but with the elections coming up, we decided that we wanted to get in before the elections. And so we decided we decided that we would have another one back at Heathrow in March. So in theory, 5 weeks before the election. Of course, the election could be called sooner, but probably unlikely at this juncture. Brown's going to drag it out. He thinks he's riding on a bit of a wave at the moment. That is until the latest news hits the mainstream media. We'll see whether that actually happens. But we've got some amazing names here. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, who would have ever thought we could have got the likes of David Bellamy and Johnny Ball at an event like Alternative View? And the reason that Bellamy came along to AV2 was because, of course, he was extremely frustrated that his media career had been curtailed purely because he refused to kowtow to the official dogma on anthropogenic global warming. And he gave a superb presentation, but he stayed with us the whole weekend, and a wonderful guy, and but you could tell there was a sort of, a droop in the shoulders. He was resigned to the fact that, his career was over, his media career was over, and he wasn't going to get another opportunity. But things changed, of course, in November, late November, and we're going to talk about that through the evening. And I spoke to him today on the phone because I asked him for an article for the programme for the Alternative View, and he's like a kid with a spring in his step. He's got a new lease of life. So he's coming back here to AV4, and I think we're going to see a very different David Bellamy at AV4 than we saw at AV2. And Johnny Ball is just so frustrated. How many here remember Johnny Ball? Oh, 1 or 2, okay. So Johnny Ball is just so frustrated that, having spent sort of years on TV trying to introduce a couple of generations to science and mathematics, that what he sees right now is effectively kids having intellectual curiosity drummed out of them, beaten out of them, and they're just being told what to believe. It's a dogma. And woe betide anybody who dares question the dogma. And we're going to talk more about questioning dogma as we go through the evening. So I spoke at the hotel earlier this evening. There's only 30 rooms left, so if anybody is interested in coming for the whole weekend, better get in quick. But as of right now, day and individual lecture tickets are available, so if there's particular presenters there that you're interested in, then do make a trip. It's an amazing lineup. There's some brochures around here somewhere, so you can take a further look at that as evening goes on. Now, this presentation that I'm going to give tonight, I actually gave for the first time at AV3 in Bristol. And this is very significant because at the time it looked as though we were heading down the track like a steam train for global governance and a totally new global economy based on carbon trading. Now, tragically, the vast majority of people have really no idea what that would have meant. But the good news is, you don't have to worry yourself about it because, certainly for the time being, it's dead and buried. Copenhagen, instead of being the foundation stone for global governance, ended up as nothing more than a bit of a get-together and some round-table discussions, but nothing was ever going to come out of it. And the great tragedy is, of course, that a lot of green groups were there because they had been deceived into believing that Copenhagen offered a tremendous future for humanity. And this is the classic magician's trick. Because a lot of the green agenda is very, very long on emotion, but actually very, very short on fact and objectivity. Now, that's not to suggest that for one moment that I'm advocating that we should continue polluting the planet the way we have. But, we have to face up to the holistic agenda, the whole agenda, and not just cherry pick. And certainly be very, very vigilant when it comes to global politicians or globalists, whether they're in politics or whether they're part of the industrial military complex, putting forward an agenda. Because you actually have to look at what it is they're really trying to say. Because quite often, it's very different from what they're actually publishing. Now, during the course of my presentations, I always use a lot of newspaper cuttings. And somebody said to me at a recent presentation, they said, how come you use a lot of newspaper cuttings? Because you're always telling us that the newspapers are full of lies. That's true. But the newspapers are also full of truths. And the challenge for each of us is to practice discretion and discernment, to be able to determine the complete and utter bullshit from the relevant fact. Because the news media is actually a way in which these guys use to communicate with each other, to let each other know what the real agenda is. And so what we have to do is we have to effectively read between the lines or between the articles and pick out the truth. So newspaper circulation is reducing dramatically because more and more people actually are beginning to realise that the newspapers are not really much more than comics. And so they're going elsewhere for their news. In most cases, that's online. So this evening, we're going to focus very much on the green agenda and population control. And as I heard Mike say in the introduction, somebody somewhere, or a group of people, actually want to reduce the Earth's population dramatically. And they're spelling it out in words of one syllable, and actually, as Mike also referenced, in tablets of stone. Because here they are, the Georgia Guidestones. This is a henge that appeared quite mysteriously in 1982. Now this is no small henge. I mean, these slabs of granite stand 19 feet above the ground. So obviously there's a considerable amount underneath as well, supporting that henge. But carved on that henge in 12 modern languages and 12 ancient languages are the 10 goals and objectives of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of this planetary fiefdom. And to them, that's exactly what it is. It's a planetary fiefdom. And humanity is nothing more than a commodity to be traded in, to be used and abused, to be deceived, to be kept in slavery, whether that be economic slavery or literal slavery. It depends on perhaps where you are on the planet. But I'm not going to go through all of these 10 goals and objectives because one of the things that I always say in my presentations is don't take anything that I say at face value. Okay? You've absolutely no need to do so. And I would be mortified if anybody re-quoted anything from my presentations without actually sort of checking it for themselves. And of course you have a tremendous opportunity to do that. You know, I mean, this tool, the internet, has been with us, well, for 20 odd years, but in a real usable format, certainly for the last 10 to 12. And you know, never before in known recorded history has there been an opportunity to access information on such a real-time basis. I mean, even 15 years ago, it would not have been possible for me to do the research, or many of us to do the research that we're able to do today. So, you know, let's make use of that tool, because we don't know how much longer we might actually have it. But a couple of the, or three of the objectives that I am going to mention. Number one, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. And you know what? There are people, and forgive me, I don't mean to offend anyone, and I will go back and make clear what I'm talking about. But many people who regard themselves as bastions, pillars of the New Age community, say, yeah. But you know what? I don't see many of them putting themselves or their families first in line to be part of the reduction. So, you know, those who support this reduction, of course, it's always somebody else. It's always somebody else's family. Now, 500 million. Now, supposedly, the population on this planet today is reportedly in excess of 7 billion. I actually don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I actually believe that the 7 billion figure is being hyped to help create this perception of overpopulation. Now, why don't I believe that figure? Well, let's take a look at just a few facts that cause me to have the hypothesis that the population is probably quite significantly less than 7 billion. First of all, the population in most Western countries is falling. The most money spent on any non-essential medical treatment across the planet right now is spent on fertility treatment. So something does not stack up here. You know, many of the Western countries are actually importing people because they need to import people for their labour market. Now, I know that's a problem right now, for sure, especially with probably 8 million or so people, if not unemployed, then certainly underemployed. But even within the African nations where, you know, we still have disease, we have high mortality, we still have high infant mortality, but we also know that we have had UNICEF vaccination programs with sterilising agents incorporated into the vaccines. So, you know, when we start to sort of put all this and some other factors together, it causes me to question the 7 billion number. Now, you know, what is the number? Well, at an estimate, my estimate is that it's somewhere probably around about 4.5 billion on the planet, and that's based on reported figures, you know, census figures from Western nations, and then a sort of finger in the air in some of the underdeveloped nations where we don't have census data. But the bottom line is that the agenda is being promoted that the planet is overpopulated, because get that into your skull, so that we can start sowing the seeds about things like euthanasia. And we can start sowing the seeds so that in a generation or two, it will be acceptable, unless you, as the younger generation, agree to take financial responsibility for your aged parents, then the state will have no choice but to say adios via euthanasia. And this is what we're seeing in the media right now. We're seeing the seeds being sown. It's a multi-generational agenda. Don't expect to see a Hitlerian-type program of euthanasia, you know, anytime in the next sort of 2 to 5 years. But in the next 20 to 30 to 40 years, it's distinctly possible. And these guys are spelling out their objective, under 500 million, because that's all they believe that they need on the planet to service their needs. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Now, this is straight out of the Hitlerian agenda. This is obviously eugenics through genetic engineering, the creation of the super race. And there was a presentation at AB3 by a guy called Greg Nicoletos, who I brought over from Australia, from Brisbane. Remarkable guy. He literally jumped on a plane on the Thursday, flew to the UK, he gave his presentation on Saturday night and was back on the plane on Monday morning going back to Brisbane because he couldn't get the time off work. Remarkable presentation. I flew Greg to the UK because he, in my opinion, is the world's leading researcher when it comes to the microchipping agenda. And have any of you seen the film Astro Boy yet? But the only reason I've seen it is that I have a 7-year-old son, so I get to see these great movies. Well, Astro Boy is a cartoon, but it's about a scientist whose son is tragically killed in an accident in the laboratory. And the only thing that remains of his son is a strand of hair. And from that strand of hair, they create the robotic clone. Well, believe it or not, there are people today working in academia under the guise of transhumanism who absolutely believe that the next evolutionary step for humanity is based on chipping, is based on accelerating our mental processes, our 5 senses by chipping. And in fact, you can see on that presentation an interview with a guy who basically says, in the future, why wouldn't parents get their children chipped? Why wouldn't they get the chip when they can give them mental capacities 5, 10, 15, 20 times faster than an unchipped child? And the guy can't understand why it should even, for him it's a no-brainer. We're not dealing with human emotions when these people start talking. And number 10, be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature, leave room for nature. Well, this is an agenda that's already underway. Vast tracts of land are being bought up in the US right now and returned to wilderness. And this is part of the agenda to limit those areas in which humanity can live. So we have all of this spelled out for us in tablets of stone. And what I'm going to show you as we go through the evening is basically how they're trying to sort of create a situation where perhaps in 15, maybe not even, but perhaps in 5, 10, 15 years, you've actually got people lining up saying, you know what, I've had enough of this mortal coil. Where do I sign up for the euthanasia trip? And you can see it. You might not have joined the dots yet, but it's happening. The good news is that not everybody agrees with these guys' agenda. This is some of the more articulate graffiti. These are the ones that are actually spelled right. But the reality is that people are waking up. I mean, the tragedy is that, there are New Age weddings underneath these guidestones. This is the magnitude of the deception. And we'll talk more about how the New Age community sort of fits into, or the New Age agenda actually fits perfectly into what these guys are trying to do. But this is what's going on right now. This is what is happening. We are having to face this multiple-pronged attack that I have termed here bio-spiritual warfare. Now, I claim absolute originality for that phrase, bio-spiritual warfare. The only problem was that when I came up with it, I thought, hang on a second, this is too good a phrase. Somebody else must have used this phrase before. So I Googled it and found that Len Horowitz had been using it for about 10 years. I'd never heard of Len Horowitz until that moment. But from that point forward, I started to read Horowitz's work, and I invited Horowitz to speak at AB2. And you'll see there's a couple of the recordings of his presentations here. Remarkable guy. Remarkable guy. And his books can be heavy going, but I can absolutely recommend that this guy, he's vilified because he accepted the opportunity to become a Knight of Malta. And I had the opportunity to question him about this. And he said, he said, look, I was invited to take an award because of my work in trying to raise awareness of the bio warfare that's going on. And he said, and I accepted the award. He said, now, with the benefit of hindsight, and had I done a little bit more research, I might not have been so quick to accept it. But he did. And in doing so, you see, in reality, what he did was he actually created, if you like, a target for those people who do understand what the Knights of Malta are all about. Because they've lumped him with that brush. Now, I think, having spent a bit of time with the guy, I think the guy is genuine. But it just goes to show how easy it is to take an award with the right motivation, but then find that it's actually used against you.